Most people don't realize when it starts happening. There's no alarm, no dramatic failure, just a quiet erosion that unfolds over years. You sit down to work, to learn, to think, and something slips away before you can notice it leaving. Not intelligence, not motivation, something subtler. Your ability to stay with a thought long enough for it to change you. At first, it feels normal. Everyone's busy. Everyone's distracted. You adapt. You adjust. You tell yourself, this is just how the world works now. But slowly, the cost accumulates. Projects take longer. Ideas feel thinner. You begin to doubt whether depth was ever really your strength. What makes this dangerous is how ordinary it looks. It doesn't arrive as a crisis. It blends into daily life so well that by the time you sense the loss, you can't trace where it began. And by then, years have already passed. What follows isn't a story you can skim and still understand. It unfolds in layers, and each layer depends on the one before it. Miss the early parts, and the rest will feel incomplete. Not wrong, just hollow. There's a sequence here that mirrors how this problem actually operates. It starts gently, almost reasonably. Then it tightens, and near the end, it reaches a place most people instinctively pull away from, not because it's complex, but because it's uncomfortable to recognize. You could stop early. Many do. But stopping early doesn't protect you from the truth of it. It only guarantees that whatever conclusion you walk away with will be distorted. And distortion, in this case, is exactly how the problem survives. I didn't notice it at first, because nothing was obviously wrong. I was still reading, still working, still showing up. From the outside, it looked like progress. But inside, something felt off in a way I couldn't name. I would spend hours with material in front of me and walk away unsure of what had actually stayed. Not because it was too hard, because it never quite settled. I remember sitting at a desk late one night, staring at the same page I'd already been through twice. I wasn't confused in the usual sense. I just felt disconnected, like I was doing the motions of learning without the experience of it. That was unsettling, but subtle enough to ignore. So I did what most people do. I assumed the problem was me. Maybe I wasn't disciplined enough. Maybe I needed to try harder. I didn't question that assumption. I trusted it. And for a long time, I didn't realize how much that trust was costing me. The belief that trapped me was one I'd been praised for my entire life. That if something mattered, you pushed harder. You stayed disciplined. You forced yourself to concentrate, even when your mind resisted. Especially then. That resistance was framed as weakness. Overcoming it was framed as growth. So when my attention slipped, I didn't question the method. I doubled down on it. Longer hours, fewer breaks, more pressure. I treated focus like a muscle that only responded to strain. And for a while, it seemed to work. I could sit longer, endure more. But something else was quietly deteriorating. The work became heavier, not deeper. Understanding thinned out, replaced by repetition. I was spending more time with ideas and getting less from them. What unsettled me later was realizing this wasn't a personal failure. It was systemic. The habit itself was flawed. We're taught that forcing attention is virtuous, that struggle equals seriousness. But no one talks about the long-term cost of that belief, how it teaches the mind to associate thinking with tension, how it conditions learning to feel like resistance instead of engagement. I believed that story completely, and because of that, I didn't notice when the very habit I trusted most started working against me. If any of this feels familiar, that recognition isn't a diagnosis. It's not a verdict on your ability or your effort. It's simply what happens when a system runs long enough without being questioned. Most people never pause to examine it. They just assume the friction they feel is personal. There's a quiet relief in realizing it isn't, that the fatigue, the drifting attention, the sense that depth has become harder to reach aren't signs of decline. They're signals, normal responses to conditions that were never designed to support sustained thinking in the first place. Nothing here requires you to defend yourself or fix anything yet. This isn't about correcting behavior. It's about easing the pressure that's been misapplied for so long. When you remove blame, something softens, the urgency drops, and in that slower space, it becomes possible to look at the situation clearly, without the constant background noise of self-judgment. What finally shifted for me wasn't learning how to concentrate longer. It was understanding what concentration actually responds to. Attention isn't something you pour onto a task. It's something that emerges when the structure beneath it makes sense. For years, I treated my mind like a container. The job was to fill it with information and hold it there through effort. But that metaphor was wrong. A mind isn't a storage unit. It's more like a current. It moves naturally when there's a channel for it to follow. When there isn't, it spills everywhere, and you mistake that spill for failure. Looking back, the moments when I felt deeply focused weren't moments of strain. They were moments of alignment. When questions led naturally to other questions. When confusion had a shape instead of being a blur. When the work pulled me forward instead of me pushing against it. Understanding didn't come from holding more in place. It came from rebuilding the path the thinking moved along. Once that path existed, attention stopped needing to be forced. It stayed because it belonged there. That realization reframed everything. The problem was never my capacity to focus. It was that I had been trying to trap my attention instead of giving it somewhere coherent to go. Depth wasn't something to endure. It was something that formed when the structure underneath was finally right. That understanding changes what the future looks like. Not because it demands a different kind of effort, but because it offers a different relationship with your own thinking. The question is no longer whether you're capable of depth, it's whether you recognize the conditions that allow it to emerge. From here, nothing needs to be forced. Awareness alone shifts the balance. When you notice the difference between strain and engagement, between endurance and alignment, you regain a quiet form of choice, not a checklist, not a rule, a recognition. What lies ahead isn't about doing more or pushing harder. It's about noticing when your mind is being asked to work against its own design and when it's finally allowed to move the way it was meant to. That awareness doesn't shout, it doesn't rush you. But once it's there, it doesn't leave. And with it comes a steadier kind of confidence, not borrowed, not imposed, earned through understanding, and carried forward in silence.